Dear listeners, we're back with a new story. Get ready for cheating, revenge, and wild relationship drama. It's strange how silence can be louder than anything you've ever heard. It echoes, bounces off the walls, and settles in the spaces between the things you once shared with someone else. That's how it was after Sarah left, after I left, really, when I packed up and walked out the door. Divorce isn't like ripping off a band-aid, it's like slowly peeling back layers of skin, raw and unhealed. 11 years, gone in the span of a single afternoon when the truth came crashing down like a wrecking ball. I never thought I'd be one of those people, the ones who drift through the holidays with that hollow look in their eyes, the ones who fake smiles while everyone else is laughing. But that's exactly who I'd become. The worst part? The world keeps moving, like it doesn't notice that you're unraveling. The radio played cheerful holiday tunes, people bundled up in scarves and coats bustled around the mall, and every other window was lit up with warm lights. I was surrounded by joy, but all I could feel was this overwhelming emptiness. I sat on the couch one evening, staring at the Christmas tree I hadn't even bothered to finish decorating. Half the lights blinked, while the other half stayed dim, tangled in the mess I'd left when I couldn't be bothered to untangle them. The ornaments stayed in the box, untouched. It was like my life had been put on hold, like I was waiting for something, anything, to bring it back into focus. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Beth, my sister. She'd been trying to check in on me ever since the divorce papers were signed, but I'd been avoiding her calls. I couldn't handle the pity in her voice. This time, though, something made me pick up. "Hey, John," she said, her voice cautious but warm. "You okay?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Yeah. I'm fine." "Liar," she said softly, but there was no malice in her tone. "Look, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I'm worried about you. You haven't been around much lately." "I've been busy," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. Work's been what? A distraction? You're not fooling anyone, least of all me." I sighed and leaned back on the couch, rubbing my face with one hand. "I don't know, Beth. It just feels like everything's. I don't know how to move past this. The holidays used to be something we did together, you know. Now, it's just me, sitting here, pretending like everything's fine when it's not." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Beth spoke again. "You don't have to pretend. We all know this sucks for you. But isolating yourself isn't helping. Mom's been asking about you. She wants you to come over for dinner tomorrow." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I don't think that's a good idea." "John, come on. You can't sit in that apartment alone all the time. It's Christmas Eve tomorrow. Mom and Dad are making a big deal out of it like they always do. Just come. You don't have to stay long. Just be with us." I looked at the tree again, at the half-lit, half-finished version of Christmas staring back at me. A part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to be surrounded by the warmth and familiarity of family, but I wasn't sure if I could handle it. I wasn't sure if I could handle anything anymore. "I'll think about it," I finally said, not wanting to commit but not wanting to shut her out either. "Okay," Beth said, sounding relieved that I hadn't flat-out refused. "Just remember, we're here for you. Always." "Thanks, Beth." When I hung up, I felt the familiar tug of loneliness creeping back in. The apartment was too quiet again, and I wished I hadn't let her go so soon. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street below. Christmas lights blinked from the houses across the street, families gathering in warm living rooms, shadows of people moving behind curtains. I wondered how many of them had lives as broken as mine but wore their smiles like armor, protecting themselves from the cracks underneath. The night Sarah left was still fresh in my mind, even though it had been months since the papers were signed. I could still see her standing there, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her face pale but determined. "I never meant for it to happen this way, John," she had said, her voice trembling but firm. "How exactly did you mean for it to happen, Sarah?" I had asked, my voice cold and unfamiliar, even to me. Did you mean for it to tear our lives apart? Did you mean for it to be a secret for months? Or was this all just fun for you until you got caught? She flinched at my words, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I had spent too long biting my tongue, trying to make sense of what she had done, and now all I had left was the bitterness that had built up over the months. I'm sorry, she had whispered, but her apology felt empty, like an afterthought. I had just stood there, staring at her, feeling the weight of our broken marriage settle between us like a thick fog. I had wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but all I could do was walk out the door and not look back. And now, here I was, months later, still living with the silence, the weight of it pressing down on me every single day. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Beth. It was a text from my mother. Simple, to the point, but enough to make my heart twist. We miss you, John. Please come home tomorrow. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how to. The truth was, I missed them too. I missed being part of something that felt whole. But even with my family, I felt like a stranger in my own life. And no amount of chrism, as cheer was going to change that. But maybe, just maybe, being around them would make the silence a little less loud. The weight of the truth bore down on me like a crushing avalanche. I had been living in a fog of suspicion, fueled by a single, seemingly innocuous comment from a waitress. The gnawing uncertainty left me restless, and my attempts to ignore it were futile. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to confront Sarah directly. Instead, I opted for the route that felt both invasive and necessary, hiring a private investigator. I found Mark through an online search, sifting through reviews and recommendations. His office was a modest space on the edge of town, unremarkable but functional. I was greeted by a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and a calm, measured demeanor. He exuded an air of quiet competence that immediately put me on edge. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Mr. Davis? Mark asked, extending a hand. I'm Mark Sullivan. I shook his hand, trying to gauge his sincerity. Yes, that's me. Thanks for meeting with me. We sat down in his office, the hum of a heater in the background providing a steady but comforting rhythm. Mark's office was sparsely decorated, with just a few framed certificates and a couple of old-fashioned desks piled with paperwork. I'll get straight to the point, I said, my voice betraying the anxiety I felt. I need you to look into my ex-wife, Sarah. I suspect she's been having an affair, and I need to know the truth. Mark raised an eyebrow. Affair? You mentioned in the email that you were uncertain. What makes you think there's something more going on? I took a deep breath. A waitress recognized me at a bar and mentioned seeing Sarah with someone named Jake. She didn't know who he was, but she mentioned seeing them together. I thought it was just a slip, but it's been eating at me. I need to know if there's any truth to this. Mark nodded, taking notes. All right. I'll start by confirming the details. It's important to have concrete evidence if you're considering legal action or just want closure. He didn't need to ask more questions. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. I handed him the few details I had, Sarah's work schedule, Jake's full name, and the places I knew they frequented. Mark took the information and promised to keep me updated. Over the next week, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but every ringing phone and every knock on the door set my nerves on edge. The silence in my apartment became even more pronounced as I waited for Mark's updates. It was like being suspended in time, waiting for someone to pull the strings and set everything back in motion. When Mark finally called, it was late one evening. I was sitting in the dim light of my living room, staring at the half-decorated Christmas tree, when my phone buzzed. Mr. Davis, Mark said, his voice steady but serious. I've gathered some information for you. It's not easy to hear, but it's important you know the truth. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Go ahead. I've verified that Sarah and Jake have been involved for several months, Mark said. I've got photos and details from their meetups. They've been spending significant time together, dinners, weekends away. It's all documented. There was a pause, and I could hear the faint rustling of papers on the other end. Are you sure? I mean, this is really— Yes, Mr. Davis, Mark interrupted gently. The evidence is explicit. I understand this is difficult to process, but it's important you have all the information. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Can you send me the files? I need to see it for myself. I'll email them to you immediately, Mark said. I recommend you take your time with this. It's a lot to digest. When the email arrived, I opened it with trembling hands. The photos were clear, capturing moments I had hoped were only figments of my imagination. Sarah and Jake, laughing together at a restaurant, sharing intimate conversations in a park, moments that had been hidden from me. The realization was a cold, sharp knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't just an affair, it was an entire life being lived behind my back. I felt a surge of anger mixed with a profound sadness that threatened to overwhelm me. The weight of betrayal had never felt so heavy. The next day, I met with Mark again to discuss my options. We sat in his office, the air thick with unspoken tension. So, what do I do now? I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic but professional. It depends on what you want. If you're planning to move forward with legal action, this evidence will be crucial. But if you're seeking closure, that's something you'll have to process on your own. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. I think I need to focus on the legal side. There's no going back from this. Understood, Mark said. I'll assist you with the necessary paperwork and preparations. But remember, taking care of yourself emotionally is just as important as handling the legalities. I left Mark's office feeling like a man who had just stepped into a new, harsh reality. The world outside seemed colder, more distant. I walked to my car, clutching the folder of evidence, my mind racing with thoughts of what came next. As I drove home, I realized that while the truth was out, it didn't make the pain any less. The emptiness was still there, and now it had new, sharper edges. But at least I had answers, even if they were answers I never wanted to hear. The days following the divorce filing were a blur of legal jargon, emotional upheaval, and a relentless sense of finality. The realization that the life I had known was officially over was suffocating. The divorce papers had been filed, and Sarah had been served, but dealing with the fallout was a whole different beast. Sarah's reaction to the papers was a mix of shock, anger, and desperation. I remember the day she received the documents as if it were yesterday. She showed up at my apartment, her face flushed with a blend of rage and disbelief. She had always been someone who faced challenges head-on, but this was different. John, how could you do this? Sarah demanded, her voice cracking as she held up the divorce papers. I thought we could talk about this. I tried to keep my voice calm, though it was a struggle. Sarah, there's nothing left to talk about. The evidence is clear. I know about you and Jake. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed to falter. Jake. I didn't mean for it to end up like this. It was supposed to be a mistake, just a fling. A fling that lasted months, I said, trying to keep my tone measured. This isn't just a mistake, Sarah. This is betrayal. She took a step back, her hands trembling as she tried to compose herself. I'm sorry. I truly am. But can't we work through this? We can get counseling, talk it out. It doesn't have to end like this. I don't know if we can, I said, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. The trust is gone. I can't go back to pretending everything is okay. It's too late. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, her anger now replaced with a deep, painful regret. So that's it? You're just going to walk away from everything we had? It's not that simple, I replied. It's about moving forward, about trying to find some semblance of peace. And I can't do that while we're still tangled up in this mess. The confrontation left me drained, but it was a necessary step. I had to face the reality of our broken relationship, no matter how painful it was. Sarah's attempts to reconcile felt like a hollow gesture, a last-minute plea that couldn't undo the damage already done. Jake, on the other hand, seemed to crumble under the weight of the situation. He was always the one I perceived as opportunistic, but seeing him in the aftermath of the affair revealed a different side. Mutual friends reported that he began distancing himself from Sarah almost immediately after the divorce was finalized. One afternoon, I ran into Jake at a coffee shop near my office. I wasn't expecting to see him, but there he was, sitting at a corner table, his eyes red-rimmed and his demeanor defeated. He looked up as I walked in, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "John," he said, his voice lacking its usual bravado. "I didn't expect to see you here." I nodded curtly, not sure what to say. "Jake. I didn't expect to see you, either." There was an awkward silence between us, broken only by the clinking of cups and the murmur of conversations around us. Finally, Jake spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know this is going to sound strange coming from me, but I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this complicated." "Strange doesn't begin to cover it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I appreciate the apology. I hope you understand the mess you've left behind." He nodded, his eyes downcast. "I do. And I'm sorry for everything. It was never supposed to hurt anyone. But now it's all falling apart." "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said. "I just want to move on from this." Jake sighed and rubbed his temples, looking weary. "Believe me, I understand. It's been a mess for everyone involved. I just wish there was something I could do to make it right." "Sometimes," I said, "there's nothing left to do but move forward and try to fix what you can." The encounter with Jake was brief, but it left me with a sense of closure, albeit bittersweet. I saw him for what he was, someone who had made mistakes and was now paying the price, just like Sarah. But unlike Sarah, who was still trying to come to terms with her actions, Jake seemed to be retreating from the consequences entirely. Sarah, meanwhile, was left to face the fallout alone. The realization of what she had lost hit her hard. Her attempts at reaching out became more desperate, more frequent. She called me several times, each conversation more disheartening than the last. "John, please," she pleaded one evening. "Can't we at least talk about this one more time? I want to make things right." "I don't know what to say anymore," I replied, feeling the weariness of our endless back and forth. "I've heard it all before. The decision is final. We both need to move on." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I know I messed up, John. I know I hurt you. But I'm trying to fix things. Can't you see that?" "I see that you're sorry," I said, "but that doesn't change what's happened. We've reached the point where trying to fix things just prolongs the pain." As the weeks went by, I focused on sorting out the legal aspects of the divorce and beginning the process of rebuilding my life. The emptiness I felt was still profound, but the initial shock had begun to wear off. I was learning to navigate this new reality, step by step. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all, but there were also moments of clarity and peace. The hardest part was accepting that, while I could never undo what had been done, I could still find a way to move forward. And move forward, I did. Each day, I took small steps towards reclaiming my life, towards finding a new sense of purpose amidst the wreckage. It wasn't a perfect journey, and there were still echoes of the past that haunted me, but I was learning to live with those shadows and find my way through the darkness. The emptiness of my apartment was a constant reminder of the life I had lost. The divorce was finalized, and I was left with nothing but the echoes of a past that now felt like a distant memory. The holidays, which had always been a time of warmth and togetherness, only magnified my sense of isolation. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my living room, scrolling aimlessly through old photos on my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Emily, Sarah's cousin. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce, and the sudden ping made me pause. I hesitated for a moment before opening the message. "Hey John, it's Emily. I've been thinking about you. How are you doing? Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Emily had always been kind, and while we weren't particularly close, her reaching out was unexpected. Finally, I decided to call her back. "Hi, Emily," I said when she answered. "Thanks for getting in touch, John." Emily's voice was warm and soothing, a stark contrast to the cold silence that had become my norm. "I'm really glad you called. I've been worried about you." "I've been trying to keep busy," I replied, not wanting to dwell too much on my current state. "The holidays have been tough, though." "I can imagine," she said softly. "I know we haven't talked much since everything happened, but I wanted to reach out. I'm here if you need someone to talk to. No pressure, just a friend who's been thinking about you." There was something reassuring about her offer, a genuine kindness that felt like a lifeline in the midst of my loneliness. "That means a lot, Emily. I guess I could use someone to talk to." Emily and I ended up talking for hours that evening. We chatted about everything and nothing, about the little things that made up daily life, about her own struggles with relationships and family dynamics. The conversation was a welcome distraction from my own thoughts. One evening, we decided to meet for coffee. We chose a small cafe downtown, a place with large windows and warm lighting that felt inviting and comforting. When I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting at a corner table with a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. "John, hi," she said, standing up to greet me. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Hi, Emily," I replied, feeling a bit self-conscious. "Thanks for inviting me." We both sat down, and I couldn't help but notice the contrast between the warm, cozy atmosphere of the cafe and the cold, sterile emptiness of my apartment. It was a reminder that there was still comfort to be found, even in the smallest of places. Emily poured us both coffee and we settled into a comfortable rhythm of conversation. "So, how have you been really?" she asked, looking at me with a genuine curiosity that felt rare and refreshing. "I've been getting by," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "It's been hard to adjust to everything, especially around the holidays. It's just so different." "I understand," Emily said, nodding sympathetically. "I remember when things fell apart for me a few years ago. It was like trying to find my way in the dark. But talking helps. Sometimes just having someone listen can make a world of difference." I looked at her, feeling a sense of gratitude. "I appreciate that, Emily. It's been tough finding anyone who really understands. Most people just try to fix things or offer cliches, but you're actually listening. That's what friends are for," she said with a smile. "And you're not alone in this, John. You've got people who care about you. It might not feel like it sometimes, but you do." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself genuinely laughing and enjoying the moment. Emily's presence was a soothing balm to my wounded spirit. She didn't try to fix me or offer empty reassurances. Instead, she provided a listening ear and a shoulder to lean on. As we wrapped up our coffee date, Emily walked me to my car, her smile never wavering. "I'm really glad we did this," she said. "It's been good to catch up." "Me too," I said, feeling a sense of warmth I hadn't experienced in a while. "Thank you for reaching out. It means more than you know." "Anytime," Emily said. "I'm here whenever you need to talk. And if you ever want to hang out again, just let me know." As I drove home, I realized that while the pain of the past was still very much present, having someone like Emily in my life made it feel a little more manageable. The nights were still long and lonely, but now there was a glimmer of hope, reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. Emily's call had opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through, but as I took each step forward, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was slowly learning that healing wasn't about erasing the past but finding new ways to move forward. And with Emily's support, it felt a little less daunting.